Chapter 1. The Gentleman Next Door. Rain slicked the pavement in a soft, silvery sheet, the kind that made the entire city smell like wet asphalt and distant citrus. Max Rowan stepped out of the rideshare with a cardboard box hugged awkwardly to his chest and a too-light suitcase dragging behind him. The wheels clattered on the uneven sidewalk, echoing how hollow he felt after the last few months, after walking away from the kind of relationship that left bruises you couldn't see, but still felt every time you reached for someone. The box was heavier than it looked, not because of the contents, but because his palms kept sweating. His hoodie sleeves were damp, sticking to his wrists, and his worn jeans were soaked halfway up his shins. The oversized hoodie hid most of his small, compact frame. He'd chosen it on purpose, hoping to look unremarkable, unnoticed. He smelled faintly of toasted almond blossom and night jasmine tea, a scent he tried to keep contained. It still drifted off his skin in the cold air, soft but stubborn, refusing to be swallowed by the rain. Max reached the building's entrance and cursed quietly at the old-fashioned heavy glass door. It required leverage he didn't have with one hand full. He tried juggling the box, nudging the door with a hip, and nearly lost his grip on everything at once. Then a gloved hand reached forward from behind him and held the door with quiet, effortless steadiness. Max froze for a second, blinking through wet lashes. A tall figure stepped into the sliver of light from the lobby. A man in a long black wool coat, dark hair meticulously parted with a hint of wave, glasses reflecting the yellow glow. Broad-shouldered, straight-backed. Polite in a way that felt deliberate rather than stiff. His scent hit Max a moment later, black amber resin plus warm honey citrus peel, subtle and warm, like stepping toward a fireplace. "Let me," the stranger said, voice low and smooth, carrying the faintest trace of old-fashioned courtesy. Max swallowed and shifted the box. Thanks. Sorry. I'm still figuring out how to have more than two arms." The man's mouth pulled into a small, almost shy half-smile. Perfectly understandable. Moving days rarely go according to anyone's plans. Max stepped inside, tugging his suitcase behind him, and turned to face his unexpected helper. "I'm Max Rowan," he said, pushing damp hair out of his eyes. "Apartment 3B. The man inclined his head in a gesture that would have looked pretentious on anyone else, but somehow fit him perfectly. "Beckham Vale," he replied. "I'm next door." Next door. Of course he was. Because this was exactly the kind of detail life liked to dangle in front of him, the handsome, soft-spoken alpha with polite hands and gentle posture, living 10 steps away. "Nice to meet you," Max said, trying not to sound as breathless as he suddenly felt. Beck glanced at the box in his arms. "May I help you carry those?" he asked. Most alphas did before doing whatever they wanted anyway, but there was something different in Beckham's tone. Something that made the question feel like a real choice. Max hesitated, old instincts flaring. Then he nodded. "Sure, thanks." Beck picked up 2 boxes like they weighed nothing and followed him quietly into the elevator, stopping at a courteous distance instead of crowding beside him. Max tried not to stare at the way Beck's shoulders filled out his coat, or the way raindrops clung to the strands of his dark hair. The elevator dinged softly, and they stepped out into the hallway, a warm contrast to the cold outside. Max unlocked his new door and pushed it open to reveal half-unpacked chaos. Stacks of clothes, towers of books, a lone lamp that gave off golden light but didn't quite reach all corners. Beck set the boxes down neatly near the couch, sweeping his gaze around the apartment without invading. Max realized, startled, that Beck hadn't stepped a single foot inside until Max actually said, "You can set them down here, thanks." He stayed just shy of the threshold until invited. Max watched him as he adjusted the boxes. Everything about him looked composed. Strong spine, careful movements, hands gloved in supple leather, a polite predator, a courteous storm. "So," Max said, clearing his throat, "you're a?" "Literature professor," Beck answered, removing one glove to run a hand through his damp hair. His fingers were long, elegant, more suited for turning pages than holding umbrellas. "At the university." "That explains the vocabulary," Max murmured, half to himself. Beck blinked, startled. Then he smiled, small but real. "And you?" he asked. "Freelance graphic designer. I work mostly from home. Too much from home, especially lately. The apartment felt too quiet already." Beck nodded thoughtfully. "If you need tools, extra light bulbs, or if something in the building malfunctions, let me know. My door is the one with the brass plaque." Max nodded, grateful. "Appreciate it." As he reached for the last box Beck had carried in, Max's fingers brushed Beck's gloved hand. Only a whisper of contact, but enough that scent bled through the thin barrier, amber warmth blending with jasmine sweetness. A shiver rippled up Max's arm. Beck inhaled sharply. He stepped back almost immediately, controlled, composed, but his eyes lingered on Max's mouth for a fraction too long, like he was reading the words Max hadn't said yet. Then he straightened. "Good evening, Max." It was the way he said it, soft, deliberate, almost too close to intimate, that made Max's heart stutter. "Good evening," Max managed. Beck nodded once and left, closing the door behind him quietly, the scent of warm amber trailing faintly like a promise. Max couldn't sleep. He lay on his mattress. No frame yet. Staring at the dim fairy lights he'd strung across the wall in a feeble attempt at cozy. Rain tapped against the window with a steady rhythm. His muscles ached from the move, but his mind wasn't tired at all. He shouldn't be thinking about his neighbor. He shouldn't be thinking about the way Beck had asked for permission, or how his scent seemed to curl under Max's skin, or the way he said good evening, like it meant something more than polite courtesy. He turned over, burying his face in a pillow. It smelled too much like cardboard and laundry detergent, too empty. He thought of his ex, of sharp voices and sharper rules, being told he was too sensitive, too needy, too dramatic, being corrected for wanting affection, for reacting at all. The move was supposed to be a reset, a clean slate. Rain softened into a whisper. Max closed his eyes. Then he heard it. A low voice through the wall. Measured, steady, calm. Beck was reading. Out loud. Poetry. Max blinked at the wall like it had personally betrayed him. The cadence was gentle, unhurried, but something about the restraint made it feel intimate, not erotic. Not exactly, but something that made Max's chest feel too tight, like the words were meant for someone who didn't know they were listening. A longing that barely touches the skin. Max swallowed hard. He rolled onto his side and inched closer to the wall, laying a tentative cheek against it. The dry wall was cool, but Beck's voice warmed through the vibrations. He listened despite himself, heat gathering low in his stomach, annoyance prickling at how easily this stranger's voice could pull him in. Through the wall, Beck read a line about hands brushing without touching. Max's scent flared. He hated how his body reacted. Shiver under the skin, breath catching, a flush that crept up his neck. He curled tighter, burying his face against the pillow, but didn't move away from the wall. Eventually, lulled by the rhythmic rain and the velvet softness of Beck's voice, Max drifted into sleep, embarrassment curling at the edges of his dreams. The next evening, Max stepped out onto the shared balcony with a mug of jasmine tea and a hoodie draped over his shoulders like a shield. The city glowed below in streaks of gold and blue, puddles reflecting neon signs and watercolor swirls. He exhaled, enjoying the quiet. Then he noticed he wasn't alone. Beck stood on the other side of the low partition, leaning against the railing. He'd traded the wool coat for a thick knit sweater, sleeves pushed up to his forearms. His glasses caught the city lights, making his eyes seem darker, deeper. "Good evening," Beck said softly. Max's grip tightened on his mug. "Hey." Beck gestured to a small tray beside him. A kettle, 2 mugs, sugar cubes, honey. It looked so composed, so intentional. "Tea?" Beck offered. "I wasn't sure if you'd be out here, but I prepared extra." Max stared at him. "Do you do everything like this?" he asked. "All formal and ritualistic?" Beck tilted his head slightly. "Only when it matters." Max's stomach flipped. He set his mug down and stepped closer. "Sure, tea sounds good." Beck poured with quiet precision. When he handed Max the new mug, Max reached out, and their fingers brushed against Beck's bare wrist where he'd slipped off one glove to handle the kettle. Heat. Immediate, shocking heat. Max inhaled sharply as their scents collided, almond blossom and jasmine tangling with amber and honey citrus in a way that felt dangerously good. The air between them shifted, thickened, became something molten. Max's pulse jumped. Beck didn't move for a heartbeat. Then his eyes darkened by degrees, almost unnoticeable unless you were watching. And Max was watching. When Beck spoke, his voice was lower, anchored with something Max couldn't quite name. "Good night, Max." The words slid over Max's skin. Before Max could process anything, including the sudden ridiculous urge to pull him closer, Beck stepped back into the doorway, retreating into shadow. Max stood there, breath caught in his chest, heartbeat too loud. He watched the door close, and he felt the ache of wanting someone he knew he shouldn't want, but couldn't help wanting anyway. His chest tightened. Rain began again, soft and distant. And Max stood on the balcony, clutching the mug to steady his shaking hands, wondering how a polite neighbor with a velvet voice had managed to slip so easily under his skin. Chapter 2. Shared walls, sharper edges. Beckham Vale began his morning the way he always did, by asserting order. His apartment was small but meticulously arranged, bookshelves alphabetized by author, spines aligned so perfectly that a visitor might think he measured them. The kitchen counter gleamed. His kettle whistled at the exact moment his coffee finished brewing. The ritual steadied him. He packed his lunch, sandwich, fruit, a thermos of tea, while his tie hung loose around his neck. He would tighten it just before leaving. He always did. He reached for his gloves next, smoothing the soft leather over his palms. His hands were strong, long-fingered, deceptively gentle. He wore gloves even at home during mornings, a boundary he rarely crossed. Scent control. Avoid accidental contact. No intimate entanglements with neighbors. Rules he never broke. Or hadn't, until Max Rowan moved next door. Beck froze halfway through, buttoning his shirt, when a warm hint of almond blossom drifted under the crack of his door. It wasn't strong. Max's scent was naturally soft, wrapped in tea and something clean. But it always caught Beck's attention, like a thread pulling tight around his ribs. It meant his neighbor was awake. He checked the time. This was earlier than yesterday. He tried not to think about what that meant. He tried not to imagine Max stumbling sleepily around his new kitchen, hair a mess, hoodie sliding off one shoulder. He tried, and failed, not to imagine Max's scent blooming richer after a shower, drifting down the hallway like a beckoning hand. Beck tipped his head back and exhaled carefully. This cannot happen. He repeated it silently, the way he did each time Max's scent found him. You do not get involved with neighbors. You do not take what isn't offered clearly. You do not let instinct decide anything. Still, he found himself lingering near the door longer than necessary, listening to faint footsteps. A cupboard opening. A soft hum. Max existed on the other side of a single wall, and Beck felt every second of it. By the time he reached the university, his tie was knotted flawlessly and his coat buttoned to the last button. His gloves remained on. He was composed again, at least outwardly. His students greeted him with holiday season restlessness. A few flirted, an alpha-tall brunette with two bold laughs, an omega with bright eyes and an overfamiliar smile, but Beck brushed each advance away with polite distance. I'm certain you'll enjoy this poem more than my office hours, he said lightly when one lingered too long. They pouted. He smiled, distant but warm. He always maintained perfect decorum. But his thoughts drifted, back to the balcony. Rain streaking Max's cheekbones. The way Max had curled his fingers around a mug, hoodie draped off one shoulder. Back to last night, Max's breath catching when Beck's fingers brushed his wrist. Back to the way Max had looked at him like he wasn't afraid of him. Like he expected Beck to be gentle, but maybe hoped he wouldn't always be. Beck cleared his throat and forced himself to focus on his lecture. He spoke about rhythm, about metaphor, about the architecture of longing in poetry. Topics that felt too close to his current state of mind. A student asked if he believed longing could be polite. Beck thought of Max's parted lips and how politely he'd said, "Good night, Max," when nothing in him had wanted to walk away. Yes, he said slowly, but courtesy has sharp edges, too. His voice dipped lower than he intended. The student blinked at him, confused. He pressed on. Evening brought him home through a drizzle, coat damp at the shoulders. He unlocked his door and stepped inside, breathing out the faint anxiety that clung to him from teaching. The apartment was quiet, warm, safe, but Max's presence lingered even here. Beck walked to the bookshelf and pulled out a slim collection of romantic poems, tasteful, respectable, hardly scandalous. He set it on the small end table beside his armchair. The lamp there cast a soft amber halo over the cushion, warming the room. He told himself he read aloud to practice cadence. He told himself it helped him unwind. He told himself he wasn't deliberately opening his window a crack so that sound carried through the hall and walls. But when he sat down and flipped open to a poem about the weight of an unspoken touch, his heart beat too loudly for the lie to convince even him. He inhaled once, smelling only his own controlled scent, amber held tightly under leather gloves. Then he began to read. His voice filled the room in a low, steady cadence, settling into the rhythm the way his hands settled onto the leather-bound edges of the book. He paced his breaths. He enunciated each soft consonant. He made himself think of the words, not the listener he wasn't supposed to think about. But he pictured Max anyway, curled under fairy lights, cheek pressed to the shared wall, lashes flickering. He lowered his voice, instinctive and dangerous. The line he read next rolled deep in his chest. Your hands, hovering like a promise you chose not to claim. The air thickened. He closed his eyes for a single beat. Through the wall, a faint sound thumped. Something small. Maybe Max, shifting closer. Beck's throat tightened. He kept reading. He shouldn't. He should stop. He should put the book away and close the window and go back to pretending Max Rowan didn't make him lose his hard-won composure. But he let the words spill into the quiet apartment, carrying just enough to slip under the neighboring door. Just enough to reach whoever might be listening. The storm rolled in after midnight. The lights flickered twice, small warnings before going out entirely. Emergency backups hummed faintly in the hallway, but the rest of the building was plunged into shadow. Beck had just set his book aside when he heard it. A soft knock on his door. Not timid, exactly. More like uncertain. He opened it to find Max standing barefoot in the hallway, drowning in a soft t-shirt and sweatpants. His hair was mussed, sticking in all directions. His phone's flashlight quivered slightly in his hand, illuminating the faint pink tint at the tips of his ears. Max said. Do you have candles? Beck didn't let his eyes linger too long on the curve of Max's throat or the exposed strip of skin where the hoodie had slid off one shoulder. He stepped aside. Of course. Come in. Max stepped past him, the warmth of his scent intensifying the moment Beck closed the door behind them. Almond blossom plus jasmine tea. Sweet. Comforting. A little intoxicating. Beck moved carefully in the dark, pulling a small candle from a drawer and lighting it. The flame bloomed golden, flickering between them. Shadows danced on the walls. Max sat gingerly on the couch, pulling his knees close, watching the flame like it was the only solid thing in the room. The light illuminated the angle of his jaw, the curve of his lips, the delicate line of his collarbone. It shouldn't have affected Beck, but it did. He sat beside him, not too close, but not as far as he normally would. Close enough that their shoulders could brush if Max turned slightly. Max did turn. His eyes were dark in the candlelight, reflecting the flame. Thanks, he murmured. I didn't really plan for apocalyptic blackout vibes. Beck smiled faintly. Most people don't. Max's gaze flicked to Beck's hands. You're not wearing gloves. Beck stiffened. He'd forgotten. He set his hands on his knees, fingers tightening. I didn't want to fumble with the matchbox. Max's lips quirked, playful despite the shadows. So you can be impractical. Occasionally, Beck allowed, voice low. Their scents mingled in the small space, warming together until the air felt heavy with something unspoken. When Max reached to steady the candle as the storm shook the windows, the flame wobbled dangerously. He went to move it toward the table, but the motion was unsteady, too quick. Beck reacted without thinking. One hand caught the candle's glass, the other wrapped around Max's wrist. Their skin touched. Bare, direct, warm, electric. Max froze, breath catching sharply. Beck felt the flutter beneath his thumb, the frantic, stuttering pulse. Max whispered, Sorry. You're trembling, Beck said. It came out lower than he intended, nearly a murmur against the space between them. Max's lips parted. His voice was a soft, breathy challenge. You say that like it's my fault. The flame steadied. Beck did not. For a moment, the room felt like it held two storms, the one outside and the one behind Beck's ribs. His instinct surged, to pull Max closer, to scent behind his ear, to command him to be still, to let himself be held. But his rules snapped back into place before instinct took over. He released Max's wrist gently, carefully, as if it were breakable glass. The absence of contact felt like cold water. He leaned back on the couch, fingers digging into his own knee to ground himself. Max, visibly flustered, pretended nothing had happened. His legs tucked beneath him, body turned slightly toward Beck, a faint flush creeping up his throat. The candle cast gold across his cheekbones. They talked. About the blackout. About work. About how Max had never lived somewhere with thin walls, and how he kept hearing Beck talking to someone named, Beck nearly choked. I was reading. Max blinked. You read poetry out loud? For fun? Beck hesitated. It relaxes me. Max's grin was small and wicked. Uh-huh, nothing to do with the fact that your voice sounds like a late-night radio host whose entire brand is seduction. Beck went still. Max seemed to realize what he'd said. His eyes widened. Sorry. I didn't mean it like... It's quite all right, Beck said, though his pulse was far too loud. He needed distance before he forgot himself. But he didn't move away. They spoke in soft bursts until the storm softened and Max finally stood, sleepy and pink-cheeked. "Thanks," he murmured again. Beck walked him to the door, resisting the instinct to touch his back. His scent lingered in the air long after Max padded barefoot back to his own apartment. When the door closed, Beck stood in the dark for a long moment. Then he went to the kitchen, bracing both hands on the counter as he sucked in a deep breath. "Control veil," he whispered. His hands shook once. Only once. He thought of Max's pulse under his thumb. The way he'd flinched at the sudden dark but covered it with a joke. The way his voice had trembled, not afraid but wanting. Beck closed his eyes. He wanted to command, to steady him, to anchor him. But not without permission. Not without clarity. Not without Max choosing him with a clear mind and steady breath. He pulled his gloves back on, feeling the leather-like armor over hands that had forgotten their boundaries tonight. The apartment still smelled like amber-soaked jasmine. He stood there in the quiet, breathing slowly, fingers curled into the counter to hold himself together. Control. He would keep it, for as long as Max needed him to. Chapter 3. Command and Courtesy. Max woke to the sensation of heat blooming beneath his skin. Not the pleasant kind, not the kind Beck's voice caused when drifting through the wall, but the heavy, creeping, wrong-timed kind that coiled low in his stomach and threatened to unravel him. He blinked at the light pouring through the blinds, groaning as he pushed himself upright. His hair was a mess, sticking out in every direction. His oversized t-shirt clung to his back. The room felt too warm, too bright, too alive around him. No, not now. He had deadlines. He had sanity. He had dignity. He wasn't supposed to be even close to heat, not with suppressants taken on schedule. He pressed a palm to his forehead. A faint fever tingled under his skin. His scent, usually soft like toasted almond blossom and jasmine tea, thickened into something syrupy, warmer, sweeter, undeniably omega. He grimaced. "Great," he muttered. "Fantastic. Excellent timing." He shuffled to the kitchen, downed a glass of cold water, and immediately grabbed the small bottle of suppressants from the counter. He shook one into his hand with shaking fingers and swallowed it dry, ignoring the bitter taste. "It's fine," he told himself, pacing across his tiny living room. "You'll be fine. It's just preheat jitters. It'll level out." His scent said otherwise. He dragged himself to his work corner, opened his laptop, and forced his brain onto the design project, due in 48 hours. A poster request from the university's literature department. Ironically, the quote they wanted on the design was one he recognized. One Beck had read through the wall. Max's stomach twisted. His fingers hovered over the keyboard before he began laying out shapes, playing with font choices, adjusting spacing. His hands trembled slightly the whole time. He tried focusing on color theory, not the way Beck's voice had dipped on certain lines, not the way Max had pressed his cheek against the wall to hear it better, not the way his entire body had reacted like Beck's voice had climbed into his bloodstream. But as he clicked and typed, the thin veneer of calm kept cracking. His breath felt shallow, his nerves on fire, his skin too sensitive even to the texture of his own shirt. Heat. Not full, not yet, but it was coming early, and with it came memories. Flashes of his ex towering over him, dismissing safe words, tightening grip instead of loosening, saying things like, "Stop being dramatic. You were made for this. Hold still, because I said so." Max's chest tightened, breath catching on an invisible hook. Not again. Never again. He pushed away from the desk and paced to the front door, checking the lock twice. "I'll ride it out alone," he whispered to no one. "I can handle it. I can handle myself." He would close the curtains, drink water, curl up with ice packs, breathe slowly, wait for the suppressant to kick in. He would not involve anyone. He would not ask anyone for help. And he absolutely would not think about the alpha next door with the velvet voice and dangerous restraint. He exhaled shakily, but his scent kept thickening. Hours later, Max stood leaning against the wall near the door, eyes half closed. The suppressant hadn't stomped the heat down entirely. It just made his body restless, jittery. He didn't realize how much scent had pooled in the apartment until he heard something outside his door. A step, a sudden halt, and then very faintly, a breath. A sharp inhale, drawn through teeth. His heart slammed hard. He knew that breath. Beck. Max stood frozen, heat spiking through his cheeks. Did Beck know? Did he smell it? Was it obvious? There was a pause. Then a knock. Polite, controlled, but too gentle to be casual. Max pressed a hand over his mouth, trying to calm himself. His pulse wouldn't slow. His scent curled around him like smoke. He cracked the door open only an inch at first. Beck stood there, holding a small pot with a towel wrapped around the handles. His coat was half unbuttoned, hair slightly one-tousled from the walk home. His gloves were still on. His posture was perfect, as always, but his eyes were darker than Max had ever seen. "Max," he said softly. Max swallowed. "Hey." Beck hesitated, then lifted the pot. "I made soup for myself, but you smell." He stopped, frowning slightly as if searching for a gentle phrasing. "Unwell." Max laughed, breathless. That's one way to put it. The laugh wobbled, turning into a shaky exhale. His legs trembled, and he braced a hand on the doorframe without meaning to. Beck's brows drew together. "May I come in?" Max hesitated. For reasons that made no sense, his brain offered him two truths at once. He wanted Beck in here, and he was afraid of wanting that. But Beck stood perfectly still, gloved hands steady, gaze patient. "No pressure." Max exhaled. "Yeah. Okay, come in." Beck entered quietly, closing the door behind him. He carried the pot to the small table and set it down gently. Max followed, feeling lightheaded. His t-shirt clung to his back, and his shorts felt too loose around his hips, his whole body restless and wrong and overheated. The scent in the kitchen thickened immediately, amber meeting jasmine, rising like sweet smoke. Beck stiffened, fingers curling against the glove seams before relaxing again. "Sit," Beck murmured. Max obeyed without thinking, lowering himself into the chair. Beck poured soup into a bowl, steam rising in gentle curls. He slid it toward Max. Max reached out. His hands shook visibly. Beck's gloved fingers brushed his wrist. Max jolted slightly, heat flooding up his neck. Beck went still. Then, slowly, deliberately, he pulled off one glove. The leather hit the table with a soft thud. Max forgot how to breathe. Beck's bare hand closed carefully around his wrist, thumb pressing lightly over his racing pulse. His skin was warm, firm, gentle. "Max," Beck said, voice deepening into a register. Max had only heard once before. "Don't move unless I tell you." The words hit like a key fitting into an old lock. Max froze, not in fear, in relief. His breath caught in his throat, thighs pressing together under the table as he trembled. Beck lifted the spoon, the motion smooth and measured, bringing it to Max's mouth. "Open," he murmured. Max did. Heat rushed down his spine in a slow, shivery wave. The soup was warm and soothing, but the real warmth came from something else, from Beck guiding him with a touch that held no pressure, no force, just calm, steady presence. Another spoon. Slow. Max swallowed. A soft sound escaped him, almost a sigh. Beck's thumb stroked his pulse once, praise without words. Max's stomach fluttered hard. The air around them grew thick with scent, sweet jasmine woven tight with molten amber. Max felt it everywhere, in his chest, in his skin, in the coil of warmth low inside him. Beck fed him another small spoonful. "Breathe," he instructed quietly. Max inhaled shakily. His eyes fluttered half-closed, cheeks warm. He felt cherished, anchored, held in place by nothing more than a voice and a hand. Every good from Beck, spoken or implied, twisted into a coil of heat in his stomach. His entire body tuned itself to the cadence of Beck's voice. At some point, Max realized he wasn't even thinking about the soup anymore. He was thinking about how Beck's hand felt around his wrist, how safe he felt being told not to move. He hated how much he liked it. Except, no, he didn't hate it. He'd never felt this kind of safety during heat. Never felt grounded. Never felt like he had the option to stop at any moment. But he did now. When the bowl was empty, Beck set the spoon down and released his wrist with painful gentleness. The sudden absence made Max shiver. Beck swallowed, jaw tight. "Good." The single word sent another hot shudder through Max's spine. Beck stood abruptly, pulling his glove back on as if he needed armor again. His scent steadied into something more controlled, though still warm around the edges. Max's breathing remained uneven long after Beck stepped away. At the entryway, Beck lingered near the door, adjusting his coat with stiff grace. The tension in the room had shifted. Not gone, never gone, but contained. Beck turned to him with that familiar, polite mask back in place. "Good night, Max." He said it with quiet finality, like he needed the words to rebuild a boundary. But something inside Max rebelled at the sound. Before he knew what he was doing, his fingers curled into the hem of Beck's coat. The touch was barely there. Barely anything. But Beck stopped instantly. Max's voice came out in a whisper. "Stay." The room stilled. Beck's hand tightened around the doorknob. His shoulders rose with a deep, conflicted breath. His scent, usually contained, controlled, spiked hot and molten for a single heartbeat. When he spoke, his voice was rough in a way Max had never heard. "If I stay right now," Beck said carefully, "I will not be polite." Max's lips parted. His heart pounded. Half of him wanted to say don't be. The other half, the part shaped by past bruises, past disrespected boundaries, hesitated. Afraid. Wanting. Overwhelmed. Beck must have sensed it, because he gently removed Max's fingers from his coat and stepped back. His eyes softened with something that wasn't rejection, something protectively careful. Tender. Guarded for Max's sake, not his own. He opened the door. "Good night," he said softly. Then he left. Max stood frozen. The door clicked shut. The quiet pressed in around him. His scent still pulsed thick in the air. His skin buzzed where Beck had touched him. He leaned back against the door, sliding down until he sat on the floor. His breath trembled out in uneven exhalations. The command had felt like a gift. Being left now felt like a protection he hadn't known he needed. And for the first time during any preheat he'd ever had, Max didn't feel afraid. He felt wanted. And devastatingly safe. Chapter 4. The Night He Stopped Being Polite. Beckham Vale had been reading the same sentence for 20 minutes. The book lay open on his chest, pages rising and falling with his uneven breaths, but his eyes, dark and strained, were fixed on the ceiling rather than the words. His shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, sleeves rolled up, skin faintly flushed with heat that wasn't his own. It came through the wall in slow, relentless waves. Max's scent. Not the gentle toasted almond blossom and jasmine tea he had grown accustomed to. Warm, sweet, almost shy. No, tonight it had deepened into something molten. Jasmine steeped too long, almond blossom heavy and syrup-like. A heat-slick version of the scent that had already been undoing him for days. Beck inhaled once, too sharply. His grip tightened on the book. Control, Vale. Control. But then, a soft sound drifted through the wall. Barely a sound at all. More like a muffled gasp. The creak of a bed frame, a breath that caught, and then faintly, painfully, Beck. He sat up so fast the book slid to the floor. His pulse slammed against his ribs, hot and immediate, instinct snarling awake like a beast he'd leashed for years. He pressed the heel of his hand against his temple, trying to shove reason back in place. Max was in heat. Max was vulnerable. Max was not his. Beck gritted his teeth. He had promised himself long ago that he would never cross a boundary blurred by biology or instinct. Never take a step unless the other person was fully lucid, fully consenting, fully clear. But the sound came again, softer this time. Beckham. Beck's breath left him in a shudder. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from the raw effort of not moving. He stood, paced once, twice, 3 times, fingers digging into his palms so hard his nails bit skin. Max needed him. The thought slid in quiet and absolute. Not an alpha instinct, not a claim, just truth. And it broke the last of Beckham's restraint. He stripped out of the button-up shirt he'd worn to bed, pulling on a loose t-shirt instead. Sweatpants. No gloves, no gloves. He didn't trust himself with them tonight. The hallway was dim when he stepped out, lit only by emergency lights at the far end. His breath fogged lightly in the cooler air as he crossed the short space between their doors. He paused, just long enough to breathe, just long enough to ask himself whether he could walk away if he needed to. He hoped, quietly, that Max wouldn't ask him to. He knocked once, soft, then again, firmer. "Max?" His voice was different, lower, rougher, pulled somewhere from his chest rather than his throat. The door cracked open, and Max appeared. Barefoot. Flushed. Eyes blown wide and dark. His hair was damp around his face, sticking to his forehead. His t-shirt clung to him, fabric damp with feverish heat, shorts hanging loose around his hips. He swayed just barely, gripping the doorframe for balance. The scent hit Beck full force. Amber-soaked jasmine, heat-sweet, devastating. Beck's hand shot out to brace against the doorframe before his knees decided to not cooperate. Max. Max swallowed, throat bobbing. His voice trembled. Hi. That ruined him. That single, shaking hi. Beck forced himself to breathe. "May I come in?" Max nodded, stepping back slowly. His fingers brushed Beck's forearm as he moved, a whisper of contact that lit Beck's skin on fire. Beck entered. The door clicked softly behind them. The apartment was warm, dim, curtains drawn tight. The air was heavy with Max's scent, curling through every corner like heat made visible. Max hovered near the couch, gripping the back of it as if his legs couldn't quite decide whether to hold him or not. Beck stayed several feet away, planting his feet as if he needed the distance to think. "Max," he said carefully, voice gentle but firm, Look at me. Max lifted his head. His pupils were blown wide, but not unfocused, not gone. Beck exhaled shakily in relief. I need to ask you something. Max nodded, chest rising and falling fast. Are you lucid enough to consent? Yes, Max breathed. I'm not all the way gone. I can answer. I know what's happening. Beck moved one step closer, slow enough that Max could stop him at any moment. You understand what it means if I stay with you tonight? Max's hands twisted in the hem of his shirt. I do. I will not, Beck said, voice steadying with the weight of promise. Cross certain lines while you're in heat. I won't claim you. I won't. He swallowed, jaw tight. Take your choices away from you. Max blinked hard, and something vulnerable trembled across his expression. I don't want what I had before. Beck's chest ached. I know. Max's voice cracked. I trust you. Trust. That word broke him cleanly in half. Beck stepped closer until they were nearly touching, heat radiating between them like a second pulse. If I stay, he murmured, you listen to my voice. If you say stop, I stop. If I doubt, I stop. Is that understood? Max trembled. Yes. Good, Beck breathed. He reached up with both hands and cupped Max's jaw gently, thumbs brushing his flushed cheeks, fingers threading through the damp strands near his ears. He paused, waiting. Max leaned into the touch. Beck's breath shuddered out. He lowered his forehead until it touched Max's. Slowly, agonizingly, he tilted Max's chin up and kissed him. It was soft at first, barely there, the brush of lips against lips. Then Max exhaled a shaky, desperate little sound. Half sigh, half plea, and his hands fisted in the fabric of Beck's t-shirt, pulling him closer. The kiss deepened. Heat sank into Beck's bones. Their breaths tangled. Max's lips parted under his, inviting him in, and Beck's control nearly snapped right there. Nearly. But he broke the kiss with a soft, commanding murmur against Max's mouth. Stay still. Max froze immediately, chest rising fast, pupils blown even wider. Beck brushed another kiss against his lips. Slow, deliberate, savoring the shiver that ran through Max's body. He kissed him again, deeper, until Max made a soft, helpless sound that Beck felt echo in his ribs. He kissed Max along his jawline, under his ear, down the side of his throat, never touching the gland. Always controlled, always careful. Max's fingers dug into his shoulders. Beck, he whispered, voice cracking. Please. He didn't say for what. But Beck heard everything in it. They ended up on the couch. Max seated on the edge, Beck between his knees, hands sliding under the hem of Max's shirt to rest against warm skin. Max arched into the touch, breath hitching. Beck felt every tremble, every soft sound, every desperate inhale. He slid a hand up Max's side, over the warm line of his waist, savoring the way Max's muscles tightened under his touch. Tell me if you want me to stop, Beck murmured. Max shook his head immediately, fingers threading into Beck's hair. Don't stop. Beck kissed him again, slow, until Max was gasping softly into his mouth. Then Beck bent his head, nose skimming the place just beneath Max's ear, breathing him in. Max shivered violently. Beck pressed a light, careful scent behind Max's ear. No mark, no claim, just warmth. Gentle, grounding. Max melted, hands clutching Beck harder, thighs tightening around him. Beck, he whispered again, voice wrecked and needy. Please. Beck's own control faltered, instinct clawing at him, to take, to claim, to sink deeper into scent and skin and heat until nothing else existed. He pulled back suddenly, chest rising and falling hard. Max looked at him with kiss-swollen lips and glassy eyes, confusion and hurt flickering across his face. Beck cupped his cheek, thumb brushing gently along the flushed skin. No, he said softly. Not tonight, not like this. Max swallowed, throat bobbing. But you're in heat, Beck said, voice rough but steady. And you're half out of your mind. I won't take your first clear choice away from you. Max's lashes fluttered. His expression softened. Hurt still there, but understanding growing with it. He whispered, Then, stay, please. Just stay. Beck closed his eyes for a moment. Then he nodded. Max's bed was a tangle of blankets and heat. Beck climbed in behind him, fully clothed, and pulled Max back against his chest. Max exhaled shakily, body curling instinctively into the warmth. Beck wrapped an arm around his waist, fingers splayed over his stomach, grounding him with steady pressure. The room smelled thick with their combined scents, amber and jasmine woven tight, but calmer now, softer, safe. Whenever Max's breathing hitched or he whimpered in his sleep, Beck whispered, Breathe, in, out, good, that's it. His voice served as a tether, a soft chain made of safety instead of control. Max relaxed each time, sinking deeper into Beck's arms. The storm in his body eased. Not through instinct, not through mating, but through quiet presence and steady hands. Eventually, Max drifted into deeper sleep, breath soft, body loose and warm against Beck's chest. Beck pressed his nose to Max's hair, inhaling slowly, letting himself feel, not instinct, not alpha drive, but something devastatingly human. Affection, want, tenderness, connection. He tightened his arm around Max, closing his eyes. Their breaths synced without meaning to. Their hearts followed moments later. And somewhere in the quiet dark, between the soft hum of scent and the warmth of shared breath, Beck allowed himself, for the first time, to stop being polite. Just enough to hold Max as if he belonged there. Chapter 5. Bend over and stay lay. Max woke slowly, like surfacing through warm water. His limbs felt heavy but not feverish, soft with the kind of pleasant exhaustion that came only after the worst had passed. The light was pale, slipping through the slatted blinds in gentle stripes that painted across his sheets, and across Beckhamvale's arm. Still around him. Max blinked, breath-catching. Beck lay behind him, fully clothed. One strong arm curved along Max's waist, as if his body had grown accustomed to holding him through the night. Their legs were tangled beneath the blankets. Beck's scent, amber softened with honey citrus, had soaked into the bedding overnight, merging with Max's own jasmine-heavy warmth until the air smelled like something new. Something shared. Max's heart did something stupid and soft in his chest. He turned carefully, not wanting to wake him too abruptly. Beck didn't budge at first, only murmured something low and unintelligible. His dark hair was mussed beyond repair, an endearingly human contrast to his usual crisp composure. There were faint shadows beneath his eyes. He'd barely slept, Max realized. He must have stayed alert through the worst parts of the heat, even when Max drifted in and out. And he'd kept his distance all night. No marks, no bruises, no claiming. Not even a wandering hand, just quiet, steady presence. Max swallowed tightly, emotion catching in his throat. Beck's eyelids lifted slowly. His first sight was Max's face, and something gentle flickered across his expression, something that made Max's pulse spike in a very unhelpful way. "You stayed," Max whispered. Beck's voice was still rough with sleep. "You asked." Max's lips lifted, small and crooked. "I'm starting to think the building should hire you as my personal tenant services hotline." Beck huffed out a soft, sleepy laugh. "I believe the university would be displeased if I added Omega regulation reading to my office hours." Max snorted out an unexpected laugh. Relief loosened something tight inside him. "God," Max said, rubbing his eyes, "I haven't woken up from a heat feeling, normal like this, ever." Beck's eyes softened. That's how it should be. Max looked at him then, really looked, at the rumpled hair, the shirt wrinkled from sleeping next to him, the hand still resting lightly on his waist. "You took care of me." Beck's expression didn't change much, but there was a quiet intensity in it. "You needed anchoring, not anything else." Max felt warmth flood his chest and flush up his neck. He had no idea what to do with it. "Hungry?" Beck asked gently. Max's stomach answered before he could. Beck smiled, faint, fond, and devastating. 10 minutes later, Max sat at his small kitchen table wearing Beck's borrowed t-shirt, the one Max had tugged on sometime in the night when his own had gotten too damp with fever. Beck stood at the stove. Sleeves pushed up, cooking eggs like this was a perfectly normal Sunday morning activity, and not the aftermath of a heat night spent wrapped around another person. Max rested his chin on his hand, watching him move. Beck cooked with the same precise care he did everything else. Measured, deliberate, with an elegance Max didn't understand but wanted to. "You're staring," Beck said without turning around. "No, I'm not. You are." Max's cheeks warmed. "You're in my kitchen making breakfast. I'm allowed to be confused." Beck glanced over his shoulder, amusement ghosting his features. "You need to eat before we talk." "About last night?" Max asked, voice softer. Beck plated the eggs, set a bowl in front of him, and finally sat down. "Yes." Max took a small bite, suddenly nervous. "Did I do something wrong?" "No," Beck said immediately, tone firm. "But we should talk about what you want going forward." Max's breath hitched. "I want." He stopped, tried again. "I want what you did last night, not because of heat, because it felt safe." Beck folded his gloved hands neatly on the table. "And the command?" Max swallowed. "It didn't feel like control. It felt like grounding, like someone catching me before I fell." Beck's brows drew together slightly, not in disapproval, but in something like quiet, fierce protectiveness. "Good. That's how it should feel." Max hesitated, and then the words spilled out. My ex, he used command like a trap, like ownership disguised as help. He didn't care if I panicked or froze, he just wanted obedience. Beck's jaw flexed, his voice dropped low. Max? It's just, I need you to know that. In case I react weirdly sometimes. Beck reached across the table slowly, giving Max infinite time to pull away. Max didn't. Their fingers touched. My voice will never be used to trap you, Beck said, each word precisely placed, only to hold you where you want to be. Max's breath shook. And only, Beck added, if you want to be held. Max couldn't speak for a moment, so he nodded, slow and sure. Beckham needed air. He stepped onto the shared balcony, the afternoon storm rolling in with low thunder and a curtain of distant rain. Cool mist brushed his hair and dampened the shoulders of his sweater. His breath came easier in the open air, but his pulse stayed stubbornly fast. Max joined him quietly, wrapped in a blanket, holding a mug of jasmine tea. Beck's coat draped loosely over his shoulders like a second skin. Beck's heart gave an unsteady ache at the sight. Max leaned against the railing, blanket pulled tight, eyes on the darkening sky. You always look like you're posing for a book cover out here, he murmured. Beck's lips curled. Do I? You did the first night. Beck gave him a sideways glance. I was being polite. And when you say good night like it's a sonnet, still polite? Beck lifted a brow. You're bold today. Max smirked. I'm healed. Also, you're less terrifying in the daylight. Beck stepped closer, letting his coat fall more securely around Max's shoulders. The blanket shifted. Their bodies brushed, only briefly, but enough to make both of them inhale. Rain intensified overhead, clattering softly on the balcony railing. Max shivered. Beck didn't hesitate. He pulled Max in by the edge of the blanket until their bodies aligned, warm against cool, soft against steady. Their faces were inches apart. Max's breath hitched. Careful, Vale. Careful, Beck echoed softly, is not the word I'd use for what you're asking. Max's lips parted. Beck's restraint snapped like a bowstring. When they stepped inside, the storm was louder, wind rattling the windows. The lamps cast warm pools of light across the living room, shadows dancing along the walls. Beck turned Max gently by the shoulders until they faced each other. His hand tipped Max's chin up, slow, conscious, giving time to retreat. You are fully lucid, Beck murmured. Yes, Max breathed. You've eaten. His stomach was still warm from breakfast. Yes. And you know what you're asking for, Beck finished, voice dropping low. If you stay with me this afternoon and tonight? Max's answer was clear, steady, want laid bare in the open. I want you, he said, not just your manners. Beck didn't wait another second. He kissed him, not careful this time, not restrained. A slow, hungry slide of mouths that deepened instantly, Max's fingers curling into Beck's sweater, pulling him flush. Beck's hand slid down Max's back, spanning the small of it with perfect, controlled possession. Max moaned softly into his mouth. Beck swallowed the sound. He kissed him against the couch, against the wall, between breaths, between heartbeats. Each time he pulled back for air, he murmured, "Look at me," and each time Max did, pupils blown, breath shaking. It wrecked Beck, beautifully. Later, the rain became a steady drumbeat as Beck guided Max into the dining area. The table was cleared, the room warm, shadowed. Beck's voice shifted, lower, firmer, sliding into that steady command that had grounded Max before. Hands on the table. Max's breath stuttered, but he obeyed, placing his palms flat on the wood, fingers splayed. Don't move until I tell you, Beck murmured. The words vibrated down Max's spine, pooling heat low in his stomach. His back remained partially turned, exposing the line of it beneath the thin fabric of his borrowed t-shirt. Beck stepped behind him. His hands skimmed slowly, reverently up Max's arms, down his sides, over the warm curve of his waist. Max trembled under each touch, breath unsteady. Good, Beck whispered. Beautiful. Max's eyes fluttered closed. Beck leaned in, kissing the back of Max's neck, soft at first, then deeper, lips trailing upward along the hairline. Max made a soft, helpless sound that blended with the sound of rain hitting the window. Beck pressed his forehead to Max's shoulder for one long moment, scenting him lightly, never touching the gland, just breathing him in like he was the first inhale after drowning. Their bodies aligned. Heat pressed through fabric, shared and building. Max's voice cracked. Beckham, please. That was what shattered the last of Beck's restraint. He braced a hand on the table beside Max's, the other anchoring Max's hip. Mine, Beck whispered, but only after Max's desperate, crystal-clear please. The world swelled, the room blurred. Heat and breath and sensation layered until Max could feel nothing but Beck. holding him, grounding him, guiding him through every trembling moment with murmured praise and steady hands. A knot was implied in the way Max felt anchored, filled, held through the deepest crest of heat, but nothing explicit, only the sense of being embraced completely, safely, until Beck whispered against his skin, "It will ebb soon. Breathe, love." And Max did. Later, wrapped in soft clothes and a shared blanket on the couch, they sipped tea while rain softened into a gentle drizzle. Their scents, amber and jasmine, had fused into something warm and unmistakably theirs. Beck checked Max's forehead, adjusted the blanket over his knees, placed a glass of water within reach. Max rolled his eyes affectionately. "You fuss like an old-fashioned alpha house husband," he teased. Beck snorted. "Not unkindly. If the role fits." Max laughed, tired but glowing. He leaned into Beck, resting his head on his shoulder. "Good night," Max murmured, mimicking Beck's early, overly polite tone. "You and your manners." Beck pressed a soft kiss to Max's hair, smiling against it for the first time in a way that was truly unrestrained. "Then," he whispered, voice low and warm and wicked, "bend over and stay." Max's laughter was bright and easy, echoing warm through the room, and he did stay. Pressed close on the couch, tea forgotten on the table, storm whispering outside, scents woven into the air, home settling softly, finally, around them both.